Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moigans from Big Mountain Studio. If you're interested in iOS development, then subscribe and click on that bell icon down below so you can get notified when I come out with new iOS tutorials. In the previous video, we added the ability for a user to add days to their trip. The new day was added to the bottom of the list, but what if users want to add a day at the beginning of the trip or in the middle of the trip? Well, they can't do that the way it's set up right now. So what we're going to do is when they add a new day, we're actually going to have them select a date so we can sort on that date. So in this video, not only will you learn how to implement a date picker, but you're also going to learn how to correctly format and display dates for your international audience. Now, before we jump into updating our model so we can use dates, I want to cover a few things about dates and working with dates first. Now, my first word of advice when working with dates is stick with the calendar object that you're given. Dates can be tricky no matter which programming language you're using. Believe it or not, there are many calendars used around the world. If you look at that screenshot, you can see 3 examples of calendars right there. And then you have the complexity of time zones and leap year and different amounts of days and months. So let's go over a couple of things with this calendar object. First, you won't always know where your user is, so you have to get their current calendar to work with. Once you have that, you can use it to do date calculations, such as changing the date and time by minute, hour, day, month, etc. This date by adding function is the one that we're going to be using pretty soon. Okay, so we have a little bit of knowledge about dates and using the calendar object. Let's head into our project and see how we can update our model with a date. Okay, so we're in our model. This is the day model. And we want to change this property right here, this title property, from a string to a date. So let's do that. And what I'll do is I'll just default it to today's date. Now, of course, after I change that, there's going to be a lot of errors in our project. So let's start updating and fixing these errors. This is now a date object. And a quick way to find other errors is just try to build it. All right, great. So we have a bunch of errors. And what you can do is just click on this up here, and you can see there's all your errors right here. So I'm going to click on the first one. And what we have here is our mock data is expecting a string when we need to give it a date. So let's handle that. I'm going to make some extra room here because there's a lot of code in here. And what I'll do for the first one, when you first start the app, I'm going to start with today's date. And to get today's date, you just do that. When you instantiate a new date object, it's using today's date, time, minute, second, milliseconds. And we're going to use that as the first day. And again, this is just for the trip to Bali. You can see here, it's calling this function create mock day model data, which is this function right here. And so it just, we're starting out with some sample data here. Okay, so we have the date set for the first one. Now, what I want to do is I want to add another day to the date. How do I do that? If I start with the day, how do I add one day like that? Well, we're going to use that function that I was telling you about before, where we access the calendar, the current calendar, and then we use the date by adding. So let's take a look at that. Again, we want to start with the calendar, get the user's current calendar, and I'll say date, and you want to make sure you get the right one. So we want this function right here, because the way this works is the first argument is, well, what do you want to add to? Which component of the calendar do you want to add to? And we want to add to the days component. So let's use that. And if I just hit dot, we get autocomplete, and then we can just pick day. We want to add to the days. How many do we want to add to the day? Just one day. And to what date? Well, the current date, today. All right, let's see what it's saying here. So it's saying that it's optional. So what I'm going to do is just force unwrap it. All right, great. Now we want to do this for the other lines, but it seems kind of like a lot of code that you have to write. Well, what we can do is we can shorten it up a little bit and create our own date function to kind of save us some space in coding. So again, I can just take this if I wanted to, and we can put it here, and we can just increment it by another one. But what I want to do is I want to create another function on the date object. And the way I'm going to do that is by creating a extension for the date object and add my own function that does this. So let's do that. And we have an extensions folder right here, so I'm just going to add it in there. There we go. And remember, I was sorting it before, so let's stick with that. Okay, I think Foundation is fine. I don't think I need to import UIKit for this one. Okay, so I'm going to create a function here, and I'll call it add days, like this. And we'll just pass in an int, and this is going to return a date. And then I'm going to use that function that we had earlier. So we'll say return, and I think it's still on the clipboard, so let me just paste it in there. Yeah, there we go. Now, instead of increasing it by this hard-coded value, I'm going to increase it by this parameter right here. Okay, and now we have this handy little function where we can add days to the date. And it's just shortening that line of code that I have in my mock data class. All right, cool. So what I can do now is just do this. Create a new date, and then we'll add a day to it. It's not showing up. And if this happens, then what you can do is try building it. Now we have a bunch of errors, so of course it's going to be failures, but maybe that'll help. Yeah, now it shows up. Okay, so here we're just going to add one. Then I'm just going to use this function. And here, this is an example of just how you can shorten and modify some code just so it takes up less space. Okay, let's build it, see if we have any more errors. Okay, we do, so let's take a look there. Okay, this is the header cell where the date is displayed. It doesn't know how to display this date into a string. But what I'll do for now is I'll just cast it to a string. And an easy way to do that is like this. They're using a string interpolation. So it'll cast or change this date into a string format just so it'll work for now. We're going to be updating that later though. Okay, now this is the function where we add a new day. And it's saying, hey, this new title is a string. I'm expecting a date object. So for now, what we're going to do, let's just comment this out. And for the title, let's just manually add our new day to it. We're going to get this value from the date picker later on. But for now, we just want to build the project and make sure it builds. All right, awesome. It does build. Now let's also run it and see what happens. Okay, we click on trip to Bali. Okay, good. So this looks fine. And you can see the date format here. When we use that string interpolation, it puts it in a different format that we might not be too crazy about. But you still can see that it starts with today's date, January 13th, and it increases it to the 14th, to the 15th, to the 16th. So everything there is looking fine. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to format that date that's shown in the header here. So let's do that. And we go into the header table view cell, and this is where we want to format it. Okay, in order to format it, what we're going to use is a date formatter. Because what we want is we want to just show the date portion, but with no time. And this is because when the user adds a new day, they're just going to select a date, not a time. So we're not going to show the time. Now, another word of advice. I would suggest using these date formatting options if your app will be available in different regions or different countries. Because this date formatter will actually format dates according to the device's region. And I'll show you that later. Now here I'm showing how these date format styles look in the United States. But in many countries, the day and the month are switched. And if you use this formatter, it'll format these dates appropriately for the country that your user is in. That's why I always recommend use the built-in calendar and use the built-in date formatter, and it will know how to format and handle dates for you no matter what calendar the user is using. Okay, so let's go back into our project and format that date, and then we'll test it in different regions and different countries using different calendars. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is create a date formatter object. And then the next thing we want to do is set the style for this date on how we want it presented. And if you remember from the slide, there are a few different options, and we're just going to go with the medium option. Then once I have my formatter, it will know how to format the date that I give it. So we're going to change this a little bit here. We're going to use our formatter, and we're going to convert a date to a string. Or we're going to create a string from a date, I guess is how you'd read it. Okay. Okay, let's run it and see how that looks. Okay, great. And this is the date that we want to see. This is the format that we want to see. And again, this is the medium date style. So this looks good if you're in the United States. Now let's test what it looks like in maybe a different region or a different country, or even a different calendar. How do you test different calendars? Well, let me show you. You want to go into Settings, then go into General, and then you want Language and Region. And from there, we can select a calendar. Now, we'll stick with the United States for now, and we'll just change the calendar that we're using. By default, we're using the Gregorian calendar, but let's try a Japanese calendar. Now, we have to rerun the app to see the differences, so let's do that. There we go. And now you see, without any coding or anything like that, the date format has changed for a user who might be using the Japanese calendar. Okay, now that we see how that works, let's go back to our other calendar and change the region. Actually, I'll just close that. Go back to the Gregorian calendar. And this is also another little tip, is if you want to get kind of like a preview of what the date formatting might look like, or some of the formats of time and currency, you can look at this example they give you down at the bottom here. So let's switch it from United States. United Kingdom is right here, right next to it. So let's use that one. Click Continue. Okay. Now, if you look at the little example down below, you can see some of the formats have changed. So let's start our app again. Okay. And now you see the day is before the month. And this is how it would be formatted if the user was in the United Kingdom. And this is why I recommend using the built-in calendar object and the built-in date formatter, because it will format everything for you appropriately for the user's device, depending on which calendar they're using and depending on their region as well. Now, there's another way you can test this too, and let's check that out. Now, before I do that, I'm going to just reset this back to United States. Okay, there we go. And another way to test this is by using a different scheme. Now down here we see this itinerary app and we see edit scheme, new scheme. What are schemes? Well, these are kind of like presets that you can use when you run your project. It can use these settings for different scenarios. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new scheme, and I'll say itinerary app in UK. And then we want to edit that scheme. Okay, and then we just go to options. And then here I can set some regional information that I want to use when I run the app. So this is for the United Kingdom. So I'll go to Europe. And let's find United Kingdom down here. Okay, and that should do it. I don't think we have to change the language. Maybe we do. There's a United Kingdom English there, so let's just use that too. Okay, we'll close that. Now let's run the application. And remember, on the simulator, I had changed it back to United States. So now look at the date format. It's using the United Kingdom date format. And if I want to really quick how it would look in the United States, I could just come here, go back to itinerary. And if we run that, we should see the date format go back to how it would look in the United States. Yeah, there we go. So now the month is first and then the day is second. All right, so those are just some tips on how you can quickly test your app for international regions. Now let's continue on. And the next thing I want to work on is when we add a new day, I want to change this title or date into a date picker. Okay, let's just start with a quick overview on the UIDatePicker. By default, the date picker will show the date and time. But through the date picker mode property, we can show just a date instead. And this is what we're going to do. We just want to show a date. All right, so let's go back into our project and replace that text field with a date picker. And it is right here. Okay, so we want to delete this text field right here. And we need to create some extra space. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is select this UI view and I'm going to pull it down. And you know what? Actually, I'm going to undo that. When I pull it down, I want this text field to come with it. So what I can do is I can just change the auto resizing properties. And if I just change it so it binds to the bottom there, when I pull it, it should pull the text field down with it. Yeah, there we go. All right, let's make some room. Let's try that. And we want the date picker. There it is. Okay, it's kind of big. Let's get it in the center there, and let's resize it. All right, that should be good. Now, notice it has the date and the time. We only wanted the date, so we have to change the mode here to just date. There we go. Okay, now we're also going to need an outlet for this so we can get the date from it. So I'm going to hold down Option and then click on the View controller, and it pulls it up side by side. I think what I'll do is just reuse this outlet that is already here and just call it Date Picker. Instead of a UI text field, it's going to be a UI date picker. There you go, and just connect that. Okay, good. So the outlet is connected. And down here, let me expand this a little bit here. Oh, we can stop it too, I guess. Okay, so down here we're using a default date. So let's replace that with the date picker date. There we go. Okay, let's run that, see how that looks. And we'll just go to Mexico, start with a clean slate, add a day, January 13th, and save that. And there we go, we got January 13th, 2019. Okay, now there's one other concern that I have is when we come here and we want to type something in, let me show the keyboard. I'm going to hit Command K. Okay, good. So we have enough space. I just want to make sure that this keyboard wasn't covering up this pop-up. And just to double check, let's run it on the smallest phone that iOS 12 can run on, because we're in iOS 12 right now, if you're watching this video and you're curious. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to iPhone SE and see how it looks on there. Okay, app's running for the first time. We have some data. It's telling us we can swipe. We'll go into Mexico, add a new day. Okay, and look at that. So this is what I was afraid of. This top part right here is for auto correction. And when they're typing in a description, we probably want to keep auto correction on as a convenience. They can tap on the button, but what I want to do is I want to be able to allow them to dismiss the keyboard. So what I want to do is change this return button to a done button. So when they're done typing, they just tap that done button, keyboard goes away, then they can tap the save or cancel button if they want. Make it more easily accessible here. So first thing, how do we change the return button to a done button? Well, you do that through the text field, actually, because text fields can have different keyboards come up for them. You can have a text field that only accepts numbers. You can have a text field that is specifically for email addresses, and the keyboard that you want to show might be a little bit different where it has the @ symbol in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the text field and we're going to change the return button here. Okay, click on the text field. And then over here under the text input traits, these are all the things that pertain to the keyboard. They give you different options for the keyboard. And looking at this return key right here, we have different options here. And the thing that's cool about this is, we say done here and it's in English, but if we deploy this app in France and a French user was using it, it'll be in their language instead. So no translations necessary. That's always good. Now the second thing is, when they click the done button, I want to dismiss that keyboard. So how do we do that? Well, again, that's on the text field. So what I'm going to do is create an action outlet on this text field here. So let's go into our view controller. I'm going to hold on Option, click on the view controller, and I'm going to add an action right here. So I'll right click on the text field, drag it over here. It'll default to action. Nice little handy convenience there in Xcode 10. And we'll say done. I want to pass in the text field. And which one should I select here? I want the primary action triggered. That's that return button there. So let's connect that. Okay, but what do I say? How do I dismiss a keyboard? Well, let me show you. So we'll say sender, and the sender is the text field. And I'm going to say resign first responder, and that will dismiss the keyboard. what the heck is resign first responder? Well, let's break it apart here. The first part, resign, means to quit, leave, or give up. So the text field is going to quit being the first responder. All right, so what's first responder? It's the first UI object that will respond to UI events. So in this case, the first object to respond to the keyboard tapping events is the text field. And the text field is going to intercept those messages first and handle them by displaying whatever key or character you typed on. So all UI views can respond to UI events because they all inherit from this class called UI responder. And all UI controls, like the text field, inherit from the UI view. And text fields get assigned as first responder automatically as soon as the user taps on it and the keyboard comes up. So we don't have to tell it to be the first responder. It becomes the first responder automatically. But we do have to tell it to resign being the first responder. And, just as a little test, let's do this. I'll show you this object. So on the UI text field, I'm going to hold down Command and right-click. And we'll go in there. And I'm going to right-click on UI control. And then in there, it inherits from UI view. All UI controls inherit from UI view. And then in here, you see this object right here, UI responder. And you see it has a resign first responder. And that's what we use, resign the first responder. Okay, let's test this and see how it works. Okay, add a description. And notice the button now says done. And when I click it, it goes away. That's perfect. That's exactly what I want. Then I can save it from here. Okay, that looks good. Now, one other thing I want to change real quick, I just noticed on the SE, this add button is like right on the bottom border, right? Same here. We could probably move that up a little bit, make it look a little bit better. So we're going to do that real quick. We'll do it on 2 screens here. Okay, I'm just going to hover over this constraint and then double click it. And let's move it 20. Yeah, that looks good. And we'll do the same thing on the other screen. Click on the button. This is its bottom constraint. When it highlights, as soon as the constraint highlights, you can double click it and change the constant property there. Okay, and let's just run that, see how that looks. Yeah, that looks better. Maybe I didn't have to go 20. Maybe I could have just done 10 or 15. Yeah, it looks fine there. Okay, good. Okay, that's it for this video, but we still have a problem. The days are not sorted. We're going to handle this in the next video, where you're going to learn some cool array functions and how to compare objects for equality. Because it's really easy to compare one number to another, but what if you have an object that has many different properties, and you say, does this object equal this object? How do you know? Well, we're going to answer that in the next video. So to summarize, you learned how to format dates and test them in different calendars. You also learned how to test them for different regions, and you could see how the format changes for different regions. So if you stick with the calendar object in the date formatter, you should be safe. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Share it on social media like Twitter. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to provide a translation for this video for the title and the description only, you can provide a translation in your native language so people who speak your language can easily find this video. All right, thanks guys, and keep climbing that big mountain to be a great developer.